Release those pallets, Avery, or you're fired. Marissa Vale said it loud enough for everyone in receiving to hear. I looked past her at the two shrink-wrapped pallets. 1,200 processors, no clean chain of custody, and somewhere beyond that yellow floor line, a $340 million defense contract waiting on Friday's final review. No. The forklift driver took his hand off the controls. Marissa stared at me. Excuse me? I said I'm not releasing them. She pulled the red quarantine tag off the pallet. These parts passed inspection. They passed a visual check. We still can't prove where they came from. We have 3 days. That doesn't change the paperwork. Daniel Crow from Contracts looked at the ceiling. Ray Ortiz suddenly became very interested in a clipboard he had already checked twice. Marissa stepped closer. Give me your badge. My stomach dropped. 13 years at Helix Ridge, and somehow the end of it sounded that ordinary. I unclipped my badge. My fingers were shaking, which made me angry at myself. I tried to hide it by holding the plastic too tightly. Marissa took it, then she tore my quarantine tag in half. Move the shipment. The forklift started. I watched both pallets cross the yellow line toward production. I wanted to say something sharp, something unforgettable. What I actually said was, "You'd better be right." Not impressive. Still true. Security walked me toward the exit. Just before the door closed, Ray called my name. Avery. I turned. He was holding the certificate for the second pallet. His face had changed. The seal number doesn't match. Marissa told security to keep moving, so they did. 72 hours later, a government procurement officer froze Helix Ridge's $340 million defense review. The processors weren't counterfeit, they were genuine. Somehow, that was worse. 4 hours before I lost my badge, Ray had called me downstairs. You need to see this. What's wrong? That's the problem. I don't know yet. Ray had been inspecting incoming material for 23 years. He distrusted QR codes, video meetings, and software that described itself as intuitive. If Ray said something felt off, I checked it. The shipment came from Lancer Component Exchange, a broker we had barely used. Part numbers matched. Manufacturer markings looked right. Certificates looked almost too clean. Ray tapped one carton. Boxes are new. So? Parts don't look new. That is not a technical finding. Nope. At least he was honest. I opened a tray and inspected the processors. Nothing obvious. Then I saw the date code. I checked our approved source history. Checked it again. According to our records, that plant had not been producing this revision during that manufacturing window. Maybe our database was incomplete. Maybe production had moved. There were innocent explanations. I just didn't have proof of any of them. So I placed the shipment on temporary hold. Nina Patel from Materials Engineering came down soon after. She was 29, very good at her job, and completely unimpressed by my 13 extra years of experience. I don't see counterfeit indicators, she said. I didn't say they were counterfeit. Ray looked at me. I sighed. Fine, I said they might be. Nina gave me a small smile. Words matter. Apparently today they do. She took samples to the lab. Daniel arrived 10 minutes later asking when he could have the processors. When we verify traceability, we need them today. Then somebody should have worried about this yesterday. That was how the morning escalated. By 12:40, Marissa was in receiving. By 12:52, I was fired. By 1:10, the processors were headed into the demonstration build. I sat in my car afterward and realized my lunch was still in the office refrigerator. For some reason, that almost made me cry. Then Nina called. I nearly let it go to voicemail. I answered. Avery, I finished the first checks. And? A pause. You were wrong. I closed my eyes. The parts are genuine. The parts are genuine. Nina said it again. I was still sitting in the Helix Ridge parking lot, both hands resting on the steering wheel even though the engine was off. What did you run? Marking tests, package dimensions, material composition, comparison against known manufacturer samples. And everything matches. I stared through the windshield. So I stopped 1,200 legitimate processors. You stopped 1,200 processors with bad traceability. That's not the same thing. Nina went quiet. She knew what I meant. I had used the word counterfeit. I had been wrong. And now Marissa had exactly what she needed to make my firing look less like retaliation and more like good management. By the time I got home, Helix Ridge had already sent an internal notice. A quality-related disruption affecting critical demonstration material has been resolved following executive review. No name, no accusation, they didn't need either. I opened my laptop and started an email to half the company. The first version was angry. The second was worse. I actually used the phrase professionally suicidal, stared at it for a few seconds, then deleted the whole thing. I had just been fired for poor judgment. Sending 47 people proof that I was furious seemed unhelpful. So I ate cereal for dinner, dry. There was milk in the refrigerator. I simply forgot it existed. At 9:18, Ray called. They took my inspection copies. That's normal if there's a disputed release. They also asked whether you told me to challenge the shipment. I sat up. What did you say? The truth, you didn't. And they lost interest. That bothered me more than it should have. Ray paused. The seal on pallet 2 is definitely wrong. Could have been repacked. Maybe. Damaged seal? Maybe. Ray, I'm getting tired of maybe. So was I. But it wasn't my building anymore. The next morning, a recruiter I'd known for years called. His voice had that careful tone people use when they already know something embarrassing about you. I heard there was an issue at Helix. That traveled fast. You held critical material and the lab cleared it? I rubbed my forehead. Yes. Counterfeit? No. The pause lasted maybe 2 seconds. It felt longer. Defense manufacturing is a small industry. Your reputation can get to the next interview before your resume does. At 11, Nina texted me. Can you talk? I called immediately. I ran the surface imaging again, she said. Why? Because one of the markings bothered me. You already proved the parts are real. They are real. That word again. Then she explained. The visible lot code appeared newer than the package surface beneath it. After additional imaging, she found traces of an older identifier. Not fake manufacturer markings, a real manufacturer, a real processor. But somebody had changed the lot history. Nina read the buried code aloud. I wrote it on the back of my electric bill because it was the only paper within reach. Did you check it? I found an archived reliability bulletin. My pen stopped. What kind? Early life failure investigation. Same device family. Same lot? I don't know yet. Does Marissa know you're still checking? No. Nina, I'm not doing this for you. I almost answered defensively. Instead, I waited. My report says these parts are genuine, she continued. It doesn't say they're acceptable. That landed differently. Before hanging up, she added, you were wrong about them being counterfeit. I know. But I think you were right to stop them. I should have felt relieved. I didn't. Because counterfeit parts would have meant someone sold us a fake. Real parts with their history deliberately changed meant someone knew exactly what they had and wanted us not to. Nina called at 6:12 the next morning. I was brushing my teeth. Please tell me nobody is dying. No. Good. Give me 30 seconds. The buried lot code matches a manufacturer reliability hold from 4 years ago. I stopped moving. What kind of hold? Intermittent bond degradation after thermal cycling. I rinsed my mouth and sat down at the kitchen table. Were the parts scrapped? Some were. The rest were supposed to be returned, screened, or destroyed depending on test history. And ours? I don't know yet. That answer was getting old. Nina had found the reference in an archived manufacturer bulletin. The affected lot family had shown higher than normal early failures after repeated temperature cycling. Not every processor was bad. That was important. The problem was that nobody could treat the entire lot as normal commercial material without knowing what had happened to each subgroup afterward. What does the current certificate show? I asked. A newer production lot. So somebody changed the lot marking. Yes. Can you prove Lancer did it? No. Can you prove they knew? No. Can you prove our parts came from the held material? I can prove the buried code points to that lot family. I rubbed my eyes. 3 days earlier, I could have walked downstairs, pulled the receiving record, called the manufacturer, and frozen every related work order. Now I had no badge, no system access, no authority. Just a kitchen table and a half-empty mug of coffee I had already forgotten to drink. At 8:30, Helix Ridge's attorney emailed me a formal reminder about confidentiality. I forwarded it to Karen Holt, the employment lawyer I had hired the day before. She called almost immediately. Do not contact the Army. I haven't. Do not contact reporters. I haven't. And please don't post anything vague and dramatic on LinkedIn. I paused. I'm 36. Exactly. Old enough to know better, young enough to do it anyway. I told her what Nina had found without sending any company files. Karen listened, then said, "Let the people who still work there handle it." It was good advice. I hated it. Around noon, Ray texted me. "Pallet 1 is on the floor, half of pallet 2 too." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I put my phone face down. I did not want Ray risking his job because he thought I needed updates. Later that afternoon, Nina was called into a meeting with Marissa, Daniel, engineering and contracts. She told me about it afterward. Marissa's first question was simple. Are the parts authentic? Yes. Have any failed incoming tests? No. Daniel apparently relaxed at that point. Nina did not. The original lot history does not match the current certification. Marissa asked, "Does that prove the parts are defective?" No. Does it prove Lancer falsified the records? Not yet. Then this is a documentation issue. Nina said she almost let that pass. Then she didn't. A documentation issue is when something is missing. This looks like the history was changed. That ended the easy part of the meeting. Marissa instructed Nina to complete a formal report and keep communication inside the project team. At 4:40, Nina entered her findings into Helix Ridge's nonconformance system. She assumed contracts would review it internally. What neither of us realized was that serious supplier traceability findings on an active defense program were automatically linked to the program's readiness record. Her report connected to the hold I had entered 2 days earlier. At 5:17, Daniel called her. "Can you lower the classification?" "Why?" "It's creating unnecessary visibility." Nina looked at the old manufacturer bulletin on her screen. No. Friday morning was supposed to be Helix Ridge's final defense review. At 7:36, the government contracting office sent a notice. The review was suspended pending source traceability clarification. 6 minutes later, my phone rang. Marissa. I watched her name on the screen until the third ring. Then I answered. Marissa called 4 times. I answered the 5th. "Avery, what did you do?" "No hello." I stood in my kitchen holding a mug I had forgotten to drink from. "I made coffee." "You contacted the contracting office?" "No, the review was suspended this morning. I know that now." "How?" "You just told me." She went quiet. "Not for long. Don't play games with me." "I'm not." "You expect me to believe this happened on its own?" "I expect you to check the quality system before blaming the person you fired." That stopped her. 20 minutes earlier, Nina had texted me the 2 record numbers listed in the government inquiry. One was my quarantine entry. The other was her supplier nonconformance report. Both had been entered before anyone contacted me. Helix Ridge's program controls automatically surfaced, unresolved source traceability issues during readiness review. Nothing dramatic. No secret phone call. Just a system doing exactly what it had been designed to do. Marissa lowered her voice. "Come in." "No. We need to understand what you documented. You have the record. I want you here." A few days earlier, I probably would have gone. 13 years of habit is hard to shut off. Then I pictured Ray and Nina still inside the building while leadership tried to turn this into my personal dispute. "I'll cooperate through counsel or an independent review," I said. "I'm not coming back so someone can blame me in person." She hung up. At Helix, the government team asked for traceability on every processor already tied to the demonstration build. It should have been simple. Purchase order, approved source, manufacturer certificate, receiving record, lot history. Then somebody asked where Lancer had actually bought the parts. That was where the paperwork stopped being neat. Lancer's certificate identified a distributor. The distributor denied selling that lot. Victor Lane, Lancer's owner, said his company had bought through another reseller but refused to identify them immediately, citing commercial confidentiality. Ray called me later. Apparently mystery suppliers are confidential now. Ray, what? I'm learning. Helix stopped using the remaining processors. Then teams started locating the ones that had already moved. 184 were installed in demonstration assemblies, 62 were in bench testing. Others were still sitting in controlled inventory. Nina recommended isolating all of them. Daniel asked whether testing could continue while the documentation was sorted out. She told him no. According to Ray, she used more words than that. I was a little jealous. By afternoon, the government had not canceled the program. They had frozen the review. Important difference. Marissa told the board the issue came from an overly conservative quality hold raised by a recently terminated employee. My name was useful again. Karen forwarded me the statement. Do you want to respond? Yes. Carefully. I sighed. We sent one paragraph. I had raised a traceability concern within my assigned authority. I had not contacted the contracting office. I would cooperate with any independent review. It was painfully reasonable. Then Nina called. We found another shipment. I sat up. What shipment? Same processor, same broker. There were only 2 pallets. On Tuesday, she sounded tired. A separate Lancer shipment came in 19 days earlier under another purchase order. I stopped pacing. Same lot? Same buried lot family. No quarantine, no red tag, no argument with Marissa. Those parts had gone straight into production. How many? A pause. We don't know yet. I looked at the wall for a few seconds. The 2 pallets that got me fired suddenly seemed almost small. They weren't the beginning of the problem. They were just the first time someone had stopped it. By Friday afternoon, Helix Ridge had people digging through inventory records like the building had suddenly developed a memory problem. The earlier shipment contained 600 processors. 240 were still in stock. The rest were somewhere else. Engineering benches, environmental test units, partially completed assemblies. A few had already been packed for demonstration support. That was the part nobody liked. No aircraft were in danger. No soldiers were using the equipment. These were development systems. Still, Helix could no longer say with confidence which assemblies contained processors with questionable history. So the teams started tracing them one by one. Serial number, work order, technician, assembly, storage location. Ray called it the worst Easter egg hunt ever invented. He had been assigned to receiving, with 2 auditors. They wanted to know why the earlier shipment had passed through without a hold. Ray pulled the original records. The purchase order showed an approved distributor, not Lancer. Somewhere between purchasing and receipt, the supplier had been changed manually, while the original source classification stayed in place. When Ray called me, I asked, who can make that change? Procurement. Certain program buyers. Who did it? They're checking. Don't send me screenshots. I know. I mean it. Avery? You once texted me a controlled inspection photo because email was taking too long. That was 1 time. It was 3. He paused. You're still counting? I missed him. I didn't like how much. Meanwhile, Nina was working with an independent lab to compare samples from all 3 shipments. Same buried lot family. Same authentic manufacturer die. Same evidence that the visible lot markings had been reapplied. The big question was still unanswered. Were the processors actually defective? So far, the testing did not show widespread failures. Some units performed normally. Daniel latched on to that. During a Friday evening review, he said, "We have no evidence these processors are unsafe." Nina answered, "We have evidence the history attached to them is wrong." Those are not the same thing. I know. He looked irritated. Then be precise. She was. That was the problem. Daniel understood the distinction perfectly. If the parts passed current testing, he could keep arguing that this was paperwork, not a sourcing failure. Then the auditors asked for Lancer's emergency approval. Daniel produced a memo signed 17 days earlier. His signature was at the bottom. The memo authorized temporary use of Lancer, while full supplier verification continued because the program was behind schedule. The quality approval box was empty. So was program engineering. Below both was a handwritten note, executive direction, proceed with sourcing. No signature, no name, just enough authority to make people move and not enough to tell you who had pushed them. That evening, Karen called. "The independent investigators want you Monday. I'll be there." A few minutes later, Nina called again. "You remember the first morning? I've been unemployed for 3 days. I remember most things. You asked why the date code didn't match the approved plant history." "Yes." I spoke to the manufacturer. I stood up before I even realized I was doing it. "What did they say?" "They never released that lot into normal commercial distribution." I stopped pacing. Then where was it supposed to go? Back into controlled disposition after the reliability hold. Destroyed? Some. Others screened or returned, depending on subgroup. So how did Lancer get it? They don't know. That was bad enough. Then Nina added, "The manufacturer wants every unit isolated. Not because they had proven every processor defective, Because those processors should never have been sold as ordinary traceable stock in the first place. I sat back down. Who at Helix knew Lancer wasn't fully approved? Nina went quiet. Daniel did. I waited. She didn't say anything for a second. Then, and he wasn't the only one. Monday morning, I walked back into Helix Ridge, wearing a visitor badge. Escort required. I stared at it longer than I should have. 13 years in the building, and now I technically needed someone to walk me to the cafeteria. Karen sat beside me during the interview. Across the table were 2 independent investigators, a government quality representative, and Helix's outside counsel. Marissa wasn't there. Daniel wasn't either. I was relieved, which annoyed me. The first investigator started with the quarantine. Did you believe the processors might be counterfeit? Yes. Were they? No. Karen shifted beside me. I kept my eyes on the investigator. The testing showed genuine manufacturer devices. My first suspicion was wrong. He wrote something down. Do you regret placing the hold? I took a second before answering. No. Why not? Because we still didn't have verified traceability, and the date code didn't make sense against our approved source history. That was the part I could stand behind. Not the guess. The stop. They moved on. Did Nina Patel or Ray Ortiz send you company records after your termination? No. Did they discuss findings with you? Yes. Did you ask them to send documents? No. Did you encourage them to keep investigating? I hesitated. No, technically true. Emotionally, I had wanted them to keep digging until the floor opened, but Nina did not need me telling her how to do her job. Ray had spent most of his career ignoring suggestions anyway. Then they showed me the emergency source memo. Daniel's signature was at the bottom. Quality approval, blank. Program engineering, blank. And beneath both, executive direction, proceed with sourcing. Have you seen this before? The investigator asked. No. Were you told Lancer had been approved on an emergency basis? No. That got everyone's attention. Supplier quality should have been part of that decision. I hadn't even been invited. Why do you think you were excluded? I gave a short laugh before I could stop myself. Karen touched my sleeve. Sorry. I tried again. Probably because I tend to ask for documentation before approving suppliers. No one reacted. I looked down at the table. Apparently I had lost the room. During the break, I bought coffee from the cafeteria machine. Still terrible. That almost comforted me. Nina found me near the windows. She looked like she hadn't slept much. The investigators rebuilt the sourcing timeline, she said. The approved manufacturer had warned Helix about a 6-week delay. Daniel proposed using a broker. I was left off the sourcing call. But someone else had objected. A junior buyer named Elliot Pierce. He flagged Lancer? I asked. Full approval wasn't complete. What happened to him? Transferred off the program. Why? Nina hesitated. Performance fit. I looked at her. Of course. Then she told me about the executive review notes. Daniel had warned that broker traceability was incomplete. Marissa had replied, do not let sourcing paperwork become the reason we miss the review. That sentence bothered me more than a direct order would have. It gave people a destination and left them to choose how to get there. After lunch, Marissa finally joined the interview. She looked at me once, then turned to the investigators. Avery's interpretation of my comments is influenced by the circumstances of her termination. I let that sit. One investigator asked, did you know Lancer's supplier approval was incomplete? I knew onboarding was underway. Did you know quality had not approved the source? A pause. I understood multiple work streams were progressing in parallel. The investigator wrote something down. Then he asked, why was Miss Collins excluded from the sourcing decision? Marissa looked at me. For the first time since she tore my quarantine tag in half, she didn't answer right away. The investigation dragged on for another 3 weeks. Somewhere during the second week, I stopped waking up every time my phone buzzed. That felt like progress. Helix eventually traced all 1,800 processors from the 3 shipments. Most were recovered or isolated. Several hundred had already been installed in development assemblies, which meant technicians had to open those units back up and replace them. It was expensive, painfully expensive. But nobody had been hurt. I kept coming back to that whenever I started feeling vindictive. The independent review found no evidence Marissa had altered certificates herself. Daniel had not remarked the processors. And when the first shipment arrived, nobody at Helix apparently knew the lot had once been placed on a manufacturer reliability hold. For a moment, that almost sounded like good news. It wasn't. They knew Lancer wasn't fully approved. They knew the traceability was incomplete. They knew supplier quality had been left out. Elliot Pierce, a junior buyer, had raised concerns. Daniel kept the sourcing moving anyway. Marissa kept pushing the schedule. Then, when I finally stopped the later shipment, she overrode my hold without answering the question that caused it. Nobody had known everything. They had each known enough to be uncomfortable, and everyone seemed to assume somebody else knew the rest. That part bothered me because I recognized it. Years earlier, I had once accepted late supplier documentation because I knew the engineer involved and trusted him. Nothing happened. The paperwork arrived the next day. At the time, I treated that as proof my judgment had been good. After this mess, I wasn't so sure. Sometimes a shortcut only looks harmless because you got lucky. Karen asked if I wanted to pursue a wrongful termination claim. I don't know. You were fired minutes after exercising quality authority. I know. Do you want the job back? No. That answer came out before I had time to think about it. Helix later asked me to return for 60 days as an outside consultant to help with supplier recovery. I was ready to say no. Then Ray called, "Come back." That's your entire argument? I'm 58. I'm conserving energy. What's happening? People are afraid to make decisions. That got me. A company can recover from one bad call. It is much harder to recover once everyone becomes afraid of making any call at all. I agreed, but only with conditions. Independent reporting line. Nina stayed technical lead. Elliot returned to the program without retaliation. Ray asked me to include better coffee. I didn't. You negotiated badly, he told me. Elliot came back during my second week. He was 26 and looked like he expected me to tell him what he had done wrong. Instead, I asked why he had questioned Lancer. Their banking information changed twice during onboarding. I hadn't expected that. Did you think it was fraud? Not really. It just made me slow down. He shrugged. Daniel said I wasn't commercially flexible. I almost laughed. That usually means you asked a question somebody didn't want to answer. For the first time, he smiled. Then he handed me the supplier screening summary. Lancer had not purchased the processors from some mysterious reseller after all. They had come through an industrial liquidation company. The liquidation records carried a source code Nina recognized immediately. The material traced back to a contractor authorized to dispose of held manufacturer inventory. I read the page again. The processors had not wandered back into the market by accident. Someone had taken controlled disposition material and turned it into something that could be sold again. For the first time, we had a trail that did not end inside Helix Ridge. The government review happened on Thursday morning. No dramatic hearing room, no flags lined up behind the table. Just 12 tired people, bad coffee, open laptops, and enough supplier paperwork to make me briefly reconsider literacy. Marissa sat across from me with outside counsel. Daniel joined by video. Nina was beside me. The contracting officer opened with the only thing everyone cared about. Helix Ridge would not receive an award decision until the source control investigation was finished. Then Marissa's attorney asked to discuss the origin of the disruption. I knew exactly what was coming. My original quarantine report appeared on the screen. Suspected counterfeit material. There it was. My mistake, enlarged for 12 people. Ms. Collins initiated a significant escalation based on a technical conclusion that later proved incorrect, the attorney said. My first instinct was to defend myself. Karen had warned me about that. For once, I listened. The processors were later confirmed to be genuine, he continued. Yes, I said. He paused. I'm sorry? I was wrong. Marissa looked at me. So did everyone else. I thought the parts might be counterfeit. The material testing proved they were genuine. My initial classification was wrong. Saying it out loud felt awful. Also strangely cleaner. The contracting officer asked, would you still have stopped the shipment? Yes. Why? Because we couldn't verify the source history. The date code didn't match what we knew about the approved plant. I would write the report differently now, but I would still place the hold. That was the part I was willing to defend. Marissa leaned forward. That conclusion benefits from hindsight. Before I could answer, Nina spoke. No. She opened her report. Avery's counterfeit suspicion was wrong. Her traceability concern existed before any laboratory testing. We found the buried lot code, the manufacturer hold, and the resale trail because the shipment stayed under investigation. Marissa looked at her. So you believe Avery's technical judgment was correct? Nina shook her head. No, I believe a quality system has to survive somebody being wrong about the first explanation. I looked at her. I wished I had said it. The review moved on to Lancer. Victor Lane had finally produced acquisition records. He claimed he believed the processors were legitimate surplus. The liquidation company had sold them as reusable electronic inventory. Manufacturer records told a different story. The material had come from controlled disposition stock. The investigators referred the certification trail for further review. Nobody announced that Victor was going to prison. Nobody even knew yet whether he had knowingly misrepresented the processors or had bought them under bad paperwork himself. That uncertainty frustrated people. It also made the investigation believable. Then Daniel was questioned. He admitted approving emergency sourcing before Lancer's onboarding was complete. Why? Schedule pressure. Who accepted that risk? I did. Did Ms. Vale instruct you to proceed? Daniel paused. Marissa stared at the screen. No, he said. Then he added, she made it very clear that missing the review was not acceptable. Her attorney objected. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I worked for Marissa for 6 years. I knew what she wanted. Nobody said anything for a moment. There was no email saying use unapproved parts. No neat sentence that solved everything. Just a chain of people who understood which answer leadership wanted and kept moving toward it. By the end of the meeting, the $340 million award was still frozen. Helix could continue corrective work, but the government would now reassess whether the company's management controls were strong enough for the program. Outside, Nina and I stopped near the parking garage. She looked at me. I'm sorry I proved you wrong. I actually laughed. Don't ever apologize for that. You look miserable. I was miserable. That wasn't my point. I know. We stood there for a second. Then I said, if I ever build my own team, remind me to hire people willing to tell me I'm wrong before the mistake gets expensive. Nina smiled. Careful what you promise. At the time, I thought it was just a conversation after a very long meeting. Later, it became the reason I called her first. 6 weeks later, Helix Ridge lost the $340 million award. I found out from a news alert while standing in line for coffee. The headline said, defense deal lost over bad chips. I stared at it for a second. They weren't bad chips. I started typing a correction in the comments, got halfway through, then deleted it. I was tired of explaining the difference to strangers. The official decision was less catchy. Incomplete supplier qualification. Weak source controls. Management override of established quality processes. Corrective actions still required. Helix wasn't shut down. It didn't collapse overnight. The company had other programs and almost 4,000 employees, most of whom had never been anywhere near those pallets. I was glad it survived. That surprised me a little. The board removed Marissa as CEO after the governance review concluded that she had overridden quality without resolving the original sourcing concern and had helped create a culture where people were punished for slowing the schedule. The stock award tied to the defense program was canceled. Daniel was fired. Ray called me the afternoon it happened. Any idea what his severance was? No. Can Karen find out? She's an employment lawyer, Ray, not a gossip detective. That sounds like wasted education. Lancer Component Exchange was suspended from new Helix business while the certification trail remained under review. The liquidation company that had handled the controlled material lost authorization to process certain manufacturer disposition inventory. I cared more about that than whether Victor Lane eventually ended up in court. At least that supply path was closed. Inside Helix, the changes were less dramatic but probably more important. Emergency sourcing could no longer bypass independent quality approval. Any executive override of a quarantine required a written technical disposition. And every program had to identify, in advance, who had authority to stop material movement without asking the person responsible for schedule. Somebody in communications called the new procedure the Collins Protocol. I asked them not to. They ignored me. Ray printed Collins' protocol in enormous letters and taped it above my consultant desk. "I hate you," I told him. "No, you don't." Unfortunately, he was right. My termination dispute ended quietly. Helix corrected my personnel record, compensated me, and withdrew the statement that I had been fired for poor technical judgment. The settlement never said I had been right. I preferred it that way. Because I hadn't been right about everything, I had called the parts counterfeit before I had enough evidence. I had let my frustration with Daniel get ahead of my language. The hold was justified. Some of my words weren't. I could live with both being true. At the end of my 60-day consulting contract, the interim CEO asked me to stay as Vice President of Supplier Quality. Good salary, actual authority, a window office, which Ray considered an important ethical principle. I turned it down. Not because I was angry. Helix needed someone who could walk into a meeting without half the room remembering the day Marissa tore up my quarantine tag. I recommended Nina. She immediately said no. To the job. To vice president. Why? Too much administration. Coward. I'd been spending too much time with Ray. She eventually accepted Director of Materials Integrity. A week later, Crestline Aerospace Technologies in Colorado called me. They were building a new supplier integrity and recovery group. They wanted me to lead it. The recruiter started talking about salary. I interrupted her. "What happens when my team stops questionable material?" A pause. "They have independent hold authority." "Who can override them?" "A technical review board." "The CEO?" "No." I sat back. That answer mattered more than the number she had been about to say. Before I left Huntsville, I met Nina, Ray, and Elliot for breakfast. Ray ordered enough gravy to make his plate difficult to identify. I told them about Crestline. Nina smiled. "That sounds like you." "I want you to come." Her smile disappeared. "Doing what?" "Run materials analysis. You want the person who proved you wrong?" "Especially the person who proved me wrong." Elliot laughed. Ray pointed his fork at me. "Took you long enough to get smart." I looked at him. "You too?" "No." 2 days a month." "No." 3. "That's worse." I waited. He took another bite. "Travel covered?" By the time breakfast was over, I didn't have a full department. I had 3 people. One had proved me wrong. One had noticed what everyone else missed. And one had been punished for asking a question too early. It felt like a good place to start. 18 months later, a junior supplier engineer stopped a $1.8 million shipment while I was out at lunch. Her name was Maya Brooks. 27. 6 months at Crestline. Smart, careful, and somehow capable of using 4 different highlighter colors on a single page without apologizing. When I got back, receiving was unusually quiet. 2 pallets sat behind the yellow line. Red hold tag attached. For half a second, I was back in Huntsville. Then Maya walked over. I stopped the shipment. "Why?" "The distributor certificate lists a manufacturing site that changed ownership last year. The current source record doesn't match." "Have you confirmed why?" "Not yet." "Any failed tests?" "No." "Counterfeit indicators?" "No." A year earlier, I would have taken the paperwork from her and started checking everything myself. I almost did. Instead, I left my hands in my pockets. "What do you recommend?" "Keep it on hold until we verify traceability." "Okay." She blinked. "That's it?" "What were you expecting?" "I thought you'd review it first." "Nina will handle the material side. Supplier compliance will verify the source. You place the hold. You own it until the facts change." Maya glanced toward the pallets. "The program manager is pretty angry." I figured. 11 minutes later, he appeared. He wasn't another Marissa. He was just tired, behind schedule, and trying to get parts into production before the evening shift. "We need these tonight," he said. Maya explained the discrepancy. Then he looked at me. "Can you release them conditionally?" I shook my head. "Talk to Maya." He paused. Then he did. They disagreed. Nina joined by video. More documents were requested. Nobody shouted. Nobody threatened anyone's job. The CEO never heard about it. Ray sat nearby, pretending not to supervise anybody. He leaned toward me. "Coffee still bad?" "We moved you halfway across the country, and somehow nobody fixed the important problem." 9 hours later, the distributor produced the missing records. The processors were fine. The manufacturing site name had simply not been updated after an acquisition. No hidden defective lot, no fraud, no disaster. Maya found me before she left. I shut down part of receiving for 9 hours over an old certificate template. "You did." I feel ridiculous. I remembered exactly what that feeling was like. It wasn't ridiculous when you found it. But nothing was wrong. We know that now. She thought about it. Would you have stopped it? I almost said yes. Instead, probably. She laughed. Probably? I'm trying to become less certain before the evidence arrives. That evening, Nina, Ray, Elliot, and I had dinner together. Elliot had joined Crestline 6 months earlier and now ran supplier onboarding. Ray lifted his glass. To difficult people. Nina frowned. That sounds insulting. Depends who's saying it. My phone buzzed. Maya had closed the hold. Traceability verified. Material accepted. I read it once and put the phone away. For years, I thought my job was to be the person willing to say no. I had missed the harder part. Build a place where the newest person in the room could say it too, and still have a badge the next morning. Marissa didn't lose that $340 million deal because I stopped 2 pallets. I stopped 2 pallets. Everything after that came from what people chose to do with the warning. Across the table, Ray and Elliot were already arguing about electronic inspection records. Nina joined in. Nobody agreed with anybody. I let them keep going. That sounded about right.